right, welcome back to the Green Dispensary Marketing GDM Podcast. My name is Samuel Fisher, always trying to be talking with the biggest and best entrepreneurs, thought leaders in the cannabis industry. And today I'm talking with somebody special. His name is Javier Hasse. He's one of the leading voices in the global cannabis industry, not just the United States, but also one of the biggest thought leaders over here in Latin America. He's based out of Buenos Aires in Argentina. He's the co-founder of Planteo, better English pronunciation. He's also the author of A Guide to Medical Cannabis. He recently published a book. Javier is also a journalist. He wears a lot of different hats. He's interviewed everyone from CEOs to celebrities, and he's one of the biggest thought leaders in the industry. And so really excited to talk with him, dive a little bit more on his book, where he thinks the industry is going in 2025, some of the biggest trends in 2025 and beyond. Super excited to chat with you, Javier. How are you doing today?
Doing great, man. Thanks for that intro. I'm honored and I don't know, maybe humbled. A lot of people on Twitter, X, would not agree with you today.
Oh yeah, but who cares what people say? You know, you could say whatever you want. Yes.
Oh, I'm getting chat. I'm so bad today. It's funny. I get like both sides, right? Like, people saying that I shit on the industry, and then people saying that I kiss like corporate ass on the same day. Like, okay, which one is it?
I was actually just like posting up a link there about that. People will criticize you for whatever. You could be the best guy in the world with the best intentions, and you do something. Maybe help people. You're just helping people. They'll criticize you for that. You never know. That's why it's so important. Just have your own moral compass and not really worry about what other people say.
Well, more important things for sure.
Yeah, well, but while we're on the topic, you were maybe criticized for the same thing. I recently had Adam Bierman on this podcast. We're talking about his book, and a lot of people were coming at me for that. I said, "Why are you talking to him? Why is that? Was terrible." I noticed that you also posted up in Forbes an article on Adam Bierman. Do you want to start off by talking about a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? People want unbiased journalism. They often argue that journalist opinions don't matter, that they shouldn't insert themselves in the stories. And that is, I think, very valid. The thing is, their arguments change very quickly the moment they don't like the truth that they're reporting or something that doesn't align with their worldviews, right? That happened today, but it also happened when I did this is crazy. I hate this. The reflection. When the Adam Bierman story came out in Forbes, and I'm not taking sides.
Yeah.
My story did go into all the controversy around Medman, about everything that happened, about the people who got burned. But I think it's still a story, right? Factually, it's a story. The former CEO and co-founder of the first unicorn in cannabis, whether you feel it was justified, the valuation was justified or not, is a debate that we can have. But the fact remains that this guy was the co-founder and CEO of the first unicorn in cannabis, a very notable brand. And he came out with a memoir that is interesting and pretty explosive in many ways. So, people get mad. Someone I respect very much reached out and said, like, hey, I was surprised to see that you gave this guy a platform. And I'm like, well, it's a story, right? I did very conscientiously and purposefully include the contrasting views, right? What Adam says in his book is one side of the story, and there's another side, and both are reflected in my article. And then if people are pissed about it, well, whatever. Honestly, it's like, my job is to tell you what's going on, like to report on what's going on. And this was newsworthy to me.
100%. It's just the mark of being a good journalist is covering the good and the bad and the ugly, all different categories.
Yeah. I'm not saying like, hey, check out this book, it's great or it's not. I'm not saying this guy is good or bad. Just saying like, hey, this is happening. This memoir is dropping. Here's an early look at what the memoir includes. Very interesting stuff. And here's also the context of, in which this memoir is dropping. And that's the report, right? So yeah, I mean, people will be pissed. I understand why they're pissed when they feel someone doesn't deserve a platform. But again, that's debatable. Ultimately, it's for the judicial system to decide if something was not right, if something was not legal, and if there was such a case, then probably it would change things in the sense of who gets a platform and who doesn't. But until then, I think it's valid to report on stories that are interesting. And also, personally, the story was interesting. I read the parts of the memoir, and they were pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I was checking into it, and he seemed like he was at least overtly or outwardly being really vulnerable and honest with what he was saying. He was kind of being honest about it. I was being a little deceptive with this investor. So maybe not the words he used, but the smoke and mirrors, I think, was the word he used.
Yeah. And then the other thing is I don't think is very debatable is Medman at one point was a very big brand, a very big name, very relevant in the culture, in the industry, in the world, right? Like, you gotta be relatively notorious, good or bad, to be parodied on South Park.
It's a complete honor. They would never mock me.
What with Joe? It's like it was it was a big deal. Also, they did that Spike Jones ad that was very cool. So I don't know. There's a story there. It's not up to me to decide whether it's good or bad. People like it or not.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is kind of the mark of being a good journalist. I think I just mentioned this a little bit ago, is just being able to touch upon all the good and the bad and the ugly and whatever in between. That's really one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. And so I'd love to hear more about your personal background, how you got into the industry, specifically into journalism and El Planteo, and hear a little bit more about you. We can switch gears a little bit, but who's Javier Hasse?
It's a good question. I'm a guy from Argentina. I grew up here, always lived here. Went to public school, then went to university, got out at 22 and got a job, writing about finance for U.S. media outlets. And a year into it, in 2013, an editor asked me if I was willing to write an article about marijuana stocks at the time, they called them. And the message was, because none of a reputable journalist wants to sign an article about marijuana stocks for fear of reputational risk. And I was like, I'll ignore the diss and simply ask me, hey, are you really going to pay me to write about weed? Because I love weed. It's great. I love it on a personal level, and I love it as a cause, and I love it on a scientific level, on a political level. I'm very interested in the entire spectrum of what it covers, entails, and how it connects with different parts of the world and the human experience. And so I wrote one article, and it kind of snowballed. There weren't many people at the time, many journalists writing about cannabis seriously. And that on the business side and on the investment side. There were very serious cannabis writers writing, for instance, for High Times, right? They were writing amazing stories. But then on the traditional mainstream media side of things, people writing quote unquote boring stories, there weren't many. And so, it just snowballed. People started reaching out saying, hey, it's good to see this content pop up in mainstream platforms. I have this data for you. I have this information. I have this exclusive, and so it became a full-time career. Started getting gigs. Many publications that had once rejected me suddenly wanted to work with me because I was a niche writer suddenly and had a very decent Rolodex. I was an okay writer. I would never say I'm a great writer.
Well, you're a Spanish speaker, so I want to give you props to doing this all in English too. Like, wow.
That is hard. And my English got better, in the last 12 years or 13 years of working for US media. But I did learn from hip hop and movie and TV. So at first my accent wasn't great. And also there were a lot of things I did not know, like which words were allowed, which words were prohibited, right? There's no rap explaining certain, uses of English. So got me in a little bit of trouble at first. But then it's, I learned, and, fast forward to like 2017, I got a book deal with Entrepreneur Media, and they published it. And then I started getting, invited to speak and getting speaking engagements, and people were like flying me out and putting me up in hotels for me to speak about weed on stage, and like wearing a suit, and everything was pretty like surreal. And at the same time, a little bit like weirdly oxymoronic, or it felt that way right at the time. And then I got into Forbes and got a contributor gig, and then I got a senior contributor gig. And, throughout the last more than a decade, I've been working with Benzinga as well. Built their cannabis vertical, started hiring a bunch of people and hosting events, and became a profitable business as well. And in 2020, I went up to my boss and said, like, hey, I want to start this business in Latin America. I have the website ready to go. Will you give me some money? It was not a lot of money. And he did. He was like, yes, sure, I'll support you. You've been doing good work here. As long as you keep doing this, like, keep up the good work, I'm down to support you. And that was the genesis of El Planteo.
Let's talk about this. What was it? What's El Planteo? For some of
the Spanish language media outlets. We say it's an online newspaper just because of like how much we publish and daily news coverage.
I get your emails all the time, man.
It's a website like any other. It's the most read cannabis news source in Spanish. We have very cool partners in mainstream media. Our content gets distributed like through MSN or Microsoft News, and we syndicate to a bunch of different US outlets. We translate some of our content. We do a lot of original content. Unfortunately, do even better in social than we do on our website, even though it's the most read. People don't read as much. When we started in 2020, our numbers were through the roof, and today they're like, okay, they're still better than the industry average. But, you post a good video on Instagram and you'll get 500,000 views, and an article will never get 100. No one, not 100, like a good article will get a few tens of thousands, but it's hard to get to like 500,000 of anything, or even 100K, unless it's like a long tail evergreen SEO article, which over like since 2020, there are articles on El Planteo that have over 1 million readers, but throughout, 5 years.
Yeah.
But it's a fun journey. It's certainly challenging. I'm by education, I'm a political scientist. By trade or practice or work, I'm a journalist. And then, somehow I ended up being a CEO, and it's very challenging at times. But you learn and adjust, you adapt. It's also quite difficult operating in Latin American markets, especially in Argentina. There's a lot of volatility, so it's hard for financial planning, right? Like last year, one thing that's interesting is inflation is a real thing, right? So like last year we had like 200 and something % inflation. That means that it costs almost 3 times to buy something, at the end of the year as versus the beginning of the year. And that means you have to adjust salaries in pesos. But then if the peso versus the dollar is flat, suddenly your capex or your capital expenditure payroll suddenly triples overnight, and you have to be you have to be able to adapt and respond and continually think of new ways to generate revenue. And especially, it's a challenge, right? People want good journalism, but very few are willing to support it. Very few are willing to subscribe, sponsor an event, sponsor anything. So it's a challenge. It's a fun one. Fortunately, we've had good supporters, financial and like conceptual. We have a great team. So, we built something that we love and that we have fun doing, and that I think adds something positive to the world. So I don't know. It's been a good experience, but not without its challenges, right? My other side is like, there was one side is like hobby entrepreneur never gets a salary, nothing, like never got $1 out of Planteo, like literally never got a salary or anything. Everything went into it and to build it up. And then there's the other side of hobby, which is like, okay, have jobs in corporate America and work for massive multi-million-dollar companies in media. And then, I got a salary. Of course, it's stressful. It takes a lot of work as well, but definitely not as challenging as running your own business. It's not something very new, but the first time I heard it, it stuck with me. I was writing my first book, Start Your Own Cannabis Business. I interviewed 100 people over 60 days. People who were investors, successful entrepreneurs, celebrities, former president.
Adam Bierman's.
I don't remember kids on, but maybe he was probably. It's like someone you had to talk to back then. But Deborah Borsard, the journalist, very, very well respected journalist, told me, if starting a business and running a business was easy, then everyone would be doing it. And I know it's like nothing like mind blowing, but it's stuck with me. It's like, it's tough. It's tough. It's like every day. Some days are great and some days are very challenging.
No, 100%. I love how you got, when you're starting out El Planteo, you're talking about how you used to invest everything you're making back into the businesses. Essentially what we do too. But I wanted to ask you real quick, my previous experience before doing this whole thing was running this giant parasite SEO vertical, pulling in billions just for stupid little keywords like best cannabis seeds. Have you thought about doing that sort of vertical for El Planteo, leaning in towards monetizations of brands? Is it something you're already doing, or what would you say?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. We definitely did an SEO play for El Planteo itself, like for our content. That is how we got started. Like we started the website, and I was fortunate enough to have good media contacts so that I got a bunch of backlinks while we were filming. So suddenly we're ranking, number one for a bunch of searches. It is hard to monetize. So traffic from Latin America doesn't drive very high CPMs.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure on that, but this is like all English, like USA, Australia sort of content, and maybe there's something you could look into. Los mejores semillas de cannabis. So I think it's a competitive market, but it's
what you're asking is like, do we monetize those high positions? Not with affiliates.
Yeah. No, I was just curious.
But yeah, it's definitely like traffic is not the business, right? Like for me, it's like building a reputation, and people will want to be with you, work with you, or be around you because you're respected, or you're cool, or you are a trendsetter or a tastemaker, or that kind of stuff. I think more so than traffic itself. And also, like AI doesn't build great for written content, right? It's the paradox of AI. It needs human generated content to exist and be accurate, but at the same time, like for instance, I'll give you an example. We ranked number one for many searches, and we were ranking number one in 2020, 2021, 2022. We still rank number one for the same searches that have the same search volume, and yet the number of people who are clicking to read the article are like 10 times lower. 5 times lower. Because you search and you get an AI overview, people it will pull and it will say, yeah, the source is El Planteo, but why would you click and read more if you have all the information there?
Yeah.
It's definitely an ethical dilemma and a little bit of a paradox in that sense, right? But
yeah, that's a trend we could go into probably for like the full hour of this. So let's change gears a little bit, because I wanted to ask you some things, specifically, the book that you recently wrote. And so you recently wrote a book, A Guide to Medical Cannabis. I'm just curious, what's this book all about, and what do you hope people get from it? Just to completely switch gears, we can talk about SEO another topic.
Let's say books are very like entry level, right? My first book with Entrepreneur Media was called Start Your Own Cannabis Business, a step-by-step guide to the marijuana industry. And it's a direct competitor of the For Dummies series, right? And the second book we published, Nico Rodriguez, who is a good friend and colleague of mine, was a co-author of the book. And it was published by Sheldon Press, which is a division of Hachette Group, one of the largest publishers in the world. And they reached out and said, hey, we want this guide for using medical cannabis and CBD for health. And so what we did was break down applications of medical cannabis or CBD or hemp by conditions, like whether it's neurological conditions, whether it's sleep, whether it's pain, whether it's cancer, like symptom management, whatever it is, and spoke to a bunch of experts, right? We are not medical experts. So our job was to chat with people who actually know what they're talking about, ask them further insights, and explain how medical cannabis can be used in different settings. All this is, of course, backed by actual scientific studies, very well researched and referenced. Very cautious as well, not to overstate. Like every chapter ends with like not warnings, but like caveats, like, hey, more research is needed. This is not conclusive. Like there are few very conclusive clinical trials and scientific studies. There are certain things where we can certainly say cannabis is good for this. Like cannabis works, it's effective, it's efficient, etc. Right? There are many others where we suspect it is, or many conditions where it's great for symptom management. If someone tells you cannabis cures cancer, there's no proof of it.
Yeah, that's one of like the biggest, the only ones in the books. It cures cancer.
No, not that we know of. Maybe someone, like some people say they had that experience. Awesome. But I would never tell someone, hey, drop your whatever the doctor prescribed for your condition and replace it with cannabis.
Yeah.
And in cancer, it's great for, to stimulate appetite.
Yeah.
100%. It sometimes is affected when you do chemo or radiation therapy. It can help you with sleep. It's stressful to have cancer, Like it in many ways. And so, yeah, it can help you with sleep, and it can help you, reduce chemotherapy-induced nausea. It can help manage pain, right? And these are things that are studied, and we can say with a certain level of confidence that this is true. And again, this is not medical advice. I am not a healthcare professional, but then we can certainly not ensure that cannabis can cure downstream, right? So those were the kinds of things that we looked into. And then, newbies, like people who are not immersed in cannabis culture every day, said, hey, this is great, it's super clear. And then like people who are like very active in the cannabis space said like, hey, it's too cautious. It's like, well, yeah, that's how a book about something related to healthcare should be.
Yeah.
Very cautious, especially if it's intended for the masses, right? Like, you can't be overly cautious, especially when it's a book about benefits. It's like, okay, yeah, these are the benefits. These are the footnotes, the many, many asterisks. And of course, we also look a little bit into the historical part of prohibition and how that impacted scientific research into of cannabis or related to cannabis. So I don't know. It was a fun book to write. I wish we had more time to go deeper. But we did do a lot of interviews and had great sources, and I think it's clear, and that is the aim, right? Like some content can be poetic, some content can be wordy. This one had to be clear, and that was, I think, the objective that I think we accomplished.
Yeah, well, when you write a book too, especially just on something with such a big, broad topic like medical cannabis, there's always going to be a topic or a chapter or two that you maybe could have put in there but didn't. But the beauty is you can go back in 2 years or whatever, write a new version, and then just keep it updated. But I'm curious, on that note, what do you think is the top factor, that the top maybe discovery might be the word that you have in this book that you'd like people to learn more about?
It's a good question. What's the top? Nah, I really don't know. I would say like the cannabis is great, so good for many things. It is likely that if you suffer a condition, you can either treat it or manage some of your symptoms with something that is cannabis related or cannabis derived. It contains cannabinoids. But it's also like, we need to research this a lot more. We don't want to promise a plant that is a panacea, even though I'm thoroughly impressed by how many applications can derive from one single plant. It can do a lot, but it's notable, which is, sometimes where we want to draw the line. So I wouldn't say there was a specific discovery. There were a lot of like interesting lessons learned from speaking to experts, because there's always more nuance to medical cannabis than we think, right? It's like us, you and I would say as general population, someone who is not a doctor or a physician or a scientist. Maybe you are, I don't know.
No, not even close.
We know a little bit about it. We can repeat certain catchphrases because we heard. We can take our time to read a scientific study, take the time to try and understand it. Maybe ask GPT what standard deviation means, or if the sample size is big enough. But ultimately, there's so much like we will be able to know about it and learn.
100%.
So it's always interesting to speak to a scientist because they will always tell you something new, that you hadn't read in an article before, and you go like, oh, wow. I remember well, one of the sources in the book is Mara Gordon, right? And she is not a doctor. She is an engineer, but with very deep expertise in cannabis. And I remember years before this book, I heard a presentation that she did, I think it was in Colombia, on cannabis and sleep, right? And I thought I knew quite a bit about cannabis and sleep. And then, she explained and clearly graphed like what the right dose is for sleep. Of course, that depends on the person. And when we're up to a certain point, it can help you sleep. And after that, it becomes counterproductive. And
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about, because, sometimes if I get really high and I go to sleep, I won't have dreams. And then other nights, maybe I take a really small dose or none at all. I just have these really vivid dreams. I'm curious if you could give us some more insight on that.
from a scientific standpoint, I have no idea, but from an experiential standpoint, I can confirm, like, if you do a tolerance break, your dreams often become very vivid.
Yeah.
Very, very, very vivid. Me too. I don't dream as much when I'm consuming cannabis, and I'm not like a heavy consumer. I do consume daily, but relatively low doses and low THC. But when you go for a few days without it, you really notice how vivid your dreams are.
Yeah, and it makes you kind of want to take these tolerance breaks. It makes you want to not just, be consuming all the time, because it's really nice to get these really, really good shares.
Depends on what kind of a dreamer you are. Like, Planteo, a friend of mine was visiting from Brazil and was saying, like, dude, I am very prone to nightmares. I take tolerance breaks. I have horrible, very vivid nightmares. It's not my case. Sometimes I do. I like being in the forest, but it really depends, right? Like, suddenly you get like people dealing with PTSD find cannabis very helpful for many reasons.
Yeah.
Easily be one of them, right? If you suffer from PTSD, or something similar, you might have horrible dreams. I think it's pretty nice if you find a way to suppress them, right? Like, it's...
Yeah, that's a good point. I met somebody, I don't remember. This was like 5-6 years ago. I was over in Europe or something like that. But I was staying in some hotel, and I was talking to some guy who was telling me that he has this problem, quote unquote, with lucid dreaming, where he's constantly lucid dreaming and he wakes up and he's just in a dream. Somebody like that also, he's like almost tortured from his ability to lucid dream. But also, it's like, yeah, I'd like to not dream tonight.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's like anything. Everyone thinks that because they love something, they would want to have it every day. I don't care how much you love sushi. If you have sushi every day for 20 years, I'm sure you'll be fed up. Like, you might not. Like, you might be one of those very special people who can do the same every day for an entire lifetime. Like, but I would say most people, can get tired of basically anything, right? But I don't know, lucid dreaming, I was Christian, but see, for this guy, for sure, like, it can be tiring to have such lucid dreams. Sometimes you just want to sleep tight. Like, I love a night where I just go to sleep and wake up and don't remember anything that happened since the moment I started falling asleep. Now, I did not wake up to pee. I did not wake up to change position. I don't remember anything after falling asleep. Lovely. I'm very well rested. Yesterday, I woke up, not today, but yesterday I woke up and I was like, what a great night's sleep. Like, 8 hours straight.
Just knock out. Well, let's actually change gears a little bit here. So I want to take advantage of having you on this podcast and the knowledge that you have, and specifically some of the knowledge that you have regarding kind of the growth and investment opportunities right now in 2025. And so I'm curious, what are the biggest untapped opportunities that you see right now in the cannabis space, whether you're an investor trying to jump in or an entrepreneur thinking of a new business plan? If you being Javier Hasse, knowing what you know, what's the number one thing you'd look at right now? Is it THC drinks? Is it gummies? Is it just opening a dispensary? What do you say?
It's an interesting question. Comes with a disclaimer. None of this is financial advice or investment advice. I am not a financial expert by any means. I do look at the market a lot. I do believe in the potential of U.S. cannabis over the long term. I was getting crap today over, reporting on some bad news around an ETF, and it wasn't even bad news, just someone who had their opinion about it, and I had to report on it. I believe that this is a long-term opportunity, and it's okay to hold some stocks over the long term. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity in the international arena. I recently wrote an article on Forbes about, asking the question of whether America is missing out on the global cannabis boom. I think to a certain extent it is. I think America needs to take some kind of action, whether it's rescheduling or legalization. The U.S. right now doesn't even have a federal medical cannabis framework. More than 100 countries do, but America doesn't. I have become recently obsessed with cannabis beverages, especially right with the hemp-derived part of it because of federal availability. But it became a massive market kind of overnight in the last 2 years. They popped up everywhere. I do think it's the future in many ways, or the present, but like the future of cannabis as a consumer packaged good is more on like between like a craft beer and kombucha than at dispensaries in many cases. I think that phenomenon is super interesting, the beverage one. It's like people like convenience. Having to go to a specialized store definitely makes it more cumbersome. And I also think that people are very used to the form factor of drinks, right? You go out with friends and you have a drink. It's not as common to have a gummy. Yeah. You can't be smoking everywhere. So that is very interesting, and I think it'll become a global phenomenon soon as well. Right? For now, it's mostly in the U.S. I think there's a big overlooked opportunity in Puerto Rico, which is part of the U.S.
Does it, yeah.
280 taxes.
Oh, say that again. So Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, but they don't get the 280E. Is that what you're saying?
They don't get 280E, and they have a medical program that is, pretty extensive, and there's like $250 million a year in cannabis revenue.
Yeah,
from plant touching businesses.
Interesting.
It's a very interesting market for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I'm looking at all the time, but I think, and there's a lot of potential everywhere, I would say.
Yeah. Well, what about Latin America? This is probably the market that you know the best. Where are the biggest opportunities right now in Latin America, and how do they kind of coexist, or how will they coexist with the U.S. markets? What do you think?
It's a tough question. I think the most interesting market in Latin America is Brazil. Laws are changing slowly, but there's a very big population. A lot of people are now able to access medical cannabis in one form or another. And it's going to become massive. But it takes time. And then, Colombia, which at some point was like the big promise, didn't really materialize because the export market wasn't there. Demand wasn't there. They invested over $1 billion. Was it $1 billion?
I don't know. You have to tell me. You school me there.
Yep.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Ridiculous amounts of money. into the Colombian industry and, betting on exports. And again, like the frameworks are complex. There isn't a one set framework for international cannabis trade. There isn't enough demand. In Colombia, domestically, so far you can only sell like cosmetics and what do you call it? Formulations like compound pharmacy formulations. No flower. So didn't really materialize there. They are exporting active pharmaceutical ingredients and finished products now a little bit more. Brazil, the Brazilian market was kind of a saving grace for some companies in Colombia. Argentina has an interesting framework, but it's not commercial really. Not so much. Now there's a hemp framework that could potentially boost the economy. There's some advancements in Peru. I think the hidden gem in South America is Paraguay. They do have a medical framework. They do have hemp. They do have dispensaries for hemp-derived, like intoxicating hemp products, that's what they call them. There's some rumors about potentially going rec, an adult use law passing. Uruguay, as you know, like first country to legalize adult use cannabis in the world. Pepe Mujica, who passed away this week, very sad, leaves like, what a great guy. Anyways, Uruguay, very interesting market, but same thing. It's like very small. It's like 3 million people live in Uruguay, about 200 and something thousand patients, or patients now, just like consumers in general. Same thing, they were betting on exports. There isn't a huge export market. So it's a tough one, right? Like Mexico could be a massive market, but there are no clear regulations yet. I think the key takeaway here is kind of the same as you would get from looking at the US, like a state-by-state basis. And it's like, right now, the opportunity lies in building a domestic market.
Yeah.
There are export opportunities. There are people making money off international cannabis trade, but it's relatively negligible in the grand scheme of the cannabis economy.
Yeah, and I think knowing what you know about Latin America, knowing what I've spent 8 years of my life in Latin America, I think there's a huge, if I were to guess, a huge opportunity for these countries to export to the United States. Looking at USA prices, comparing this to Latin American, these black market prices, like there's such super high margins that would exist. I'm curious if you think that it's the black market that's holding these countries back, or is it the countries themselves, or what's the biggest thing needs to be fixed right now to really put Latin America up at the global scale?
No, it's just having buyers. Like there are people growing cannabis at industrial scales legally in several Latin American countries, whether it's Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, Paraguay, now to a certain extent maybe Peru. There isn't just a buyer. Like there are a few kilos or tons being traded internationally every year, a few tons. But there are a lot of people wanting to grow and export, and only a handful of buyers, like Germany a little bit, Australia a little bit, Israel a little bit.
Yeah.
Canada has an oversupply, so they are selling as well. But there are many more sellers than buyers. America, like the US, do not import cannabis right now, for the most part. Not at a scale that matters. So I think that's kind of it. I mean, if the US could import low-cost cannabis, they would probably import it from Latin America. And I would think they would use that mostly for processing, even if it's high quality. And the US also has an export opportunity, I think, on the based on reputation, I think. I am sure if there was an international trade, a lot of people would want to buy California cannabis as they buy champagne, right? Like,
There's where we could get those bulk deals, or the bulk pounds or whatever, 100%.
yeah, but I like premium, like that very premium product, right? I don't see like mid-level cannabis surviving in the US in a post legalization scenario. I mean, or, you know, there would be a few states where it's affordable to grow. And then, you know, it's like, yeah, I think that's about it, right? Like, but like, is there an opportunity for Latin America? More so in their domestic markets right now. There are some export opportunities, but we're still not quite there. We might be a few years away from a global cannabis economy, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prepared for it. But
yeah, well, fingers crossed for that. I love Latin America. I just wish the best for all these great countries that we have down here. And oh my goodness, we only have 7 minutes left on this meeting, so there's a lot of things I wanted to ask you that we're just not going to have time for. Well, maybe we'll do this next year or something like that again, to keep the conversation going. But just a few more fun questions for you to kind of make use of this time. First of all, I'm curious about your first time trying cannabis.
I do not recommend it. I did not recommend underage use of cannabis, but disclaimer. I have missed the disclaimer today. I'm fine with that. I was 14 at what we call here a fiesta de quince, which is a quinceañera. And one of my friends had an older brother who gave him a toothpick, basically. And we went into the bathroom and smoked this very tiny, thin joint. And we all thought it was great. I don't think we really felt much. And then, it was a couple of times a year, throughout high school. Then it got a little bit more frequent. But first time was in the bathroom in a quinceañera with a bunch of friends.
You didn't really feel it, you said, your first time?
I don't think I got high the first time. One of my friends took his first drag and said, like, wow, this tastes like a food cocktail. I do remember that. But yeah, I don't think. Also, like, good weed didn't quite exist in Argentina 20 years ago. 21, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
Most of what we had was brickweed. Most frequently came from Paraguay. So they would grow it, press the entire plant together, everything, stems, the sticks, blah, blah, blah. Not very high potency. There were some myths and rumors that they would have dogs be on the block so they could get through the border without sniffing dogs finding them. Many times it did smell like it. Like, if you were smart enough, you would just boil the brick and you would get some kind of flour, something that looked like flour.
Wow. This is no. I think we had similar quality when I was a kid with the Mexican brickweed before the whole legalization. It's maybe similar. I don't know. But these days, you've come a long way. You're not 14 anymore. What's your favorite product way to consume these days?
I'm enjoying Sky.
Joyous. Sativa indica.
In moderate THC, like 14% is more than enough for me.
Are you a sativa or indica guy?
You don't really mind. I think it's a balance. It doesn't say much as it used to. Like, everything is a hybrid. The effects are like, you don't know all about this. Like, but I think it's a combination of everything, of the different cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids. It's mostly finding a strain that fits my desired effects. Right now, down here at home, it's cheese CBD. Okay, like 1-to-1, 14% THC, 14% CBD. I don't know what else. Very chill. But yeah, I think that's it. I think the beverages are great, but I'm not big into edibles in general. They make me an uncomfortable. Like I am uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's pretty typical.
The wax. I'm a joints guy. Sometimes a dry herb fake kind of guy. I do like those when they're good. Like the shitty ones are disappointing, but the good ones are really good. And if you gave me like a vape or a dab here and there, like rarely. Like if I'm at home, like in a very specific occasion, like I will go to my friend's house and everyone is dabbing all the time, and they have fantastic quality, and they will offer like, hey, it's your turn. I'm like, no, I'm good.
Don't want to get too high.
I'll bring my own gun.
I agree. Last question for you, Javier. This is actually a little different. You usually ask what you think is next going to happen in the next 5 years, but I'm going to ask you something different. If you could pick one person throughout history, dead or alive, that you could smoke a joint with right now, who are you going to smoke with?
I always ask a question.
It could be somebody that none of us know. Maybe your grandfather. I don't know.
I mean, I won't say Bob Marley because I'm fed up of that answer, and also, I love Bob Marley, but I'm not sure if he would be the one. Yeah.
I don't know if you'd understand him. I wouldn't even understand listening to him with his English anyway.
I think it would be a lot of fun to smoke with Eminem.
Eminem, that's a good one. Yeah, okay. Wonder if he even smokes, or I bet he has. I don't know, but
he does it. He's been sober for many years. This is a hypothetical. I think Snoop Dogg would be he's a likable guy. I don't know. Obama would be very interesting.
That's a good one too.
I would have loved to smoke a joint with Pepe Mujica for sure. I don't think he smokes, but again, fantasize.
Not sure who that is. That's a new
Pepe, the former president of Uruguay.
Oh, the dude just died. Yeah, rest in peace. Rest in peace. Yeah,
I would love to smoke with him for sure. I think Sarah Silverman. Hilarious, and I know she does smoke.
What's her name? I haven't heard since my childhood.
Smoking a joint with Sarah Silverman and I don't know, Chelsea Handler and Kelsey Peretti. Just a bunch of funny people. It would be very interesting.
Well, love it, Javier. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really great conversation. As I say, I wish we could go for another hour, but I have to respect your time here. And let's do this again, maybe next year, maybe a year, something like that, when we find a good time when everything all aligns. But thanks again for coming on. Once again, Javier just wrote a book, A Guide to Medical Cannabis. Definitely check that out. He's also the founder of El Planteo. Definitely check that out, and also check him out anywhere. He's on all these different platforms. Forbes, you name a platform, he probably writes for them. But thank you so much for coming on here, Javier, and sharing just a bit of your knowledge. And definitely wish you all the best. Hey, Sam here. Thanks again for listening to the GDM Podcast. We do websites and SEO for cannabis brands and operators, and we do things a little bit differently here at GDM, where we can promise results within weeks rather than months. And so if you're looking to sell more ounces, bongs, other premium products, start selling some more weed, get in touch with us at Green Dispensary Marketing to learn more. Thanks again for listening, and hope you have a great day.